Hello and welcome to another Intro to Java Programming video. In this video, I'm going to look back at the Loop Basics program. We're going to look at that one where we drew a bunch of numbers to the JFrame. And what I want to do is I want to talk about nested loops. I want to see what happens when I put a loop inside of a loop. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my for test because that's the one that's currently being used, okay, in my paint component. If we look back at this is going to be my standard inner class template where I have a graphics context from an inner class that's of type JPanel, and we're drawing to that. We've seen this now for many, many videos, so I'm not going to go over all the details on it. I'm going to look at the inner classes paint component, and the for test is going on here. If I run this, you're going to see that it's going to bring up my JFrame, and it's going to draw a bunch of numbers to the screen. See, right here, from 2 to 31. And it does this with a loop. If we look at for test, we've got a loop. It's got a the control variable is initialized outside of the for because we modified it at the end of the last unit, and we've got our loop end condition and our update inside of the for loop. The conventional way of using a for loop, as you may recall, looks like this, and I'm going to set it back to the way we normally would use a for loop, where we've got everything right in the header of the for. And then I've got my drawstring right down here. Well, inside of here, I'm just going to do a really quick example of how a nested for loop works. For int row is 0, row less than 10, row plus plus. Nesting means the loop is fully inside of the other loop. So for int call is 0, call less than 10, call plus plus. And what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to system.out.println. I'm going to print out row times call. Then I'm going to put a space after it, like that. Oh, I'm going to make this a print, not a println. And then down below the inner loop, I'm going to do a println. And just leave it empty. I'm going to run this and we're going to see what outputs. Okay, so what we have here is we've got some output. Got a bunch of zeros. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. 0, 3, 6, 9. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 16, 18, and you can see that it's going to be increasing. But what you're really seeing here is we've got a grid. Okay? We've got a grid of rows and columns. Now they're a little bit offset because when you get the 2-digit numbers and the wider 2-digit numbers, it starts to get wider and wider and wider. But really it's a grid. It's a series of rows by columns. And let's see why that is. Here's the way the structure of nested for loops work. For each iteration of the outer loop, the inner loop has to fully go through all iterations and terminate. So let's think about this. Row is 0. 0 is less than 10. Okay, I can get into the loop. Row is currently 0. Now we run into another loop. Call is 0, call is less than 10, call plus plus. So we're going to print something out. we get to the end of the loop, and we have to go back to the beginning of this loop, not the beginning of this loop, because we're now in the inner loop. So I have to go to the header of the inner loop, call is 1. Call is 1 is less than 10. Do this, 1 plus plus, it's 2. Okay, 2 is less than 10. 3 is less than 10. I have to go all the way up to 10 before it's going to stop the inner loop. So it'll do 10 iterations of the inner loop, and then it'll do this print statement. It'll update the outer loop, see that we can get in, and then it has to do 10 more iterations of the inner loop. So for each iteration of the outer loop, it has to do all iterations of the inner loop. If we look at this, we've got row times column here. We've got a bunch of zeros because 0 times 0 is 0. And it's going to give us 10 zeros here because it's going to do 0 times 0 10 times. And then row is going to update. We're going to get a new line. Row is 1. 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 2 is 2. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Row updates is 2. Call is 0. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6, so on and so forth. And then row updates to 3. So you can see what's happening here. It's going to do 100 total iterations because for each iteration of the outer loop, it's going to do 10 iterations of the inner loop. All right, now let's change this a little bit. I'm going to make this work a little bit differently. I'm going to look at what we did on the previous one. Okay, I'm going to take a look at this drawstring and see how I did it. I updated the location of x using the control variable and a letter space. I'm going to draw a bunch of rectangles in here. G2D.drawRect, and I'm going to do this same thing. I times letter space. In this case, it's going to be, the x will be call times letter space. The y is going to be x, or row times letter space. And I'm going to make the size letter space by letter space. And let's see what happens. Oh, I think my applet or my application is going to be too small. Yeah, we start to get a grid drawn. My application's a little too small, but I've got a 10 by 10 grid drawn here. Okay? So what's happening here is I'm using the control variable for my outer loop and my control variable for my inner loop to update the x and y values. Remember, the call, the inner loop here, is going to shift my x over. So let's say the call is currently 0, letter space is 20. 0 times 20 is 20. That means our x value is 20. Row is going to stay the same for each row. So row is 0. Row times letter space is 0. So for 10 iterations of this, the row is going to be 0. That means the y value is not going to update, but the x value will. With each iteration, it's going to update by letter space. So first time x is 0, next time call is 1. 1 times 20, that's 20. So it's going to shift it over to 20. Next time through, 2, call is 2. 2 times 20 is 40. So that's going to shift it over by another 20. And you can see that the x value is going to keep increasing by 20s each time. I want you to play around with this a little bit and see what you can do. What's going to happen if we do something like this? Call plus 5 times letter space. Shifted it over just a little bit. See if you can change this and modify it by doing something with this calculation call times letter space, to add a little bit of space, a gap, like a 5-pixel gap in between those squares, in between the columns, and in between the rows. All right, thanks for watching. This is the basics of nesting. And now that you got the idea of what nesting is, we're going to take a look at the last example called circles. Circles is a bit more complex, so I wanted to give you a little grounding in nesting first.